production is wonderful. It's fantastic to hear how so many layers are on the album, but each one of them are, it's stunning. So, how about the production on this album? Was it something which you guys kind of pushed your limits in terms of making sure that the essence of the Meshuggah sound is still retained, yet you get to experiment?
Basically, I mean, this time around we were way less involved in the production than we have been previous. Because if you take Colossus or Obscene, we kind of did everything ourselves, and we were the ones that were kind of responsible for the production and how those came out. And this time around, we wanted to do it completely differently, and we did it way more old school this time, in the sense that everything was recorded live this time. It's one guitar, bass, drums, and vocals recorded at the same time, and we just did a whole shitload of takes for each song. And so this is like really old school. There's no editing. It's all like live. So that's another thing also that brings another kind of energy to the music, because you actually hear a little bit more of human flaws and a little bit more like push and pull between the musicians, which is kind of, it's one of those things that gives music nerve as well, at the same time. So the way I see it when I listen to it, it sounds a little sloppier than previous albums, but at the same time, in that sloppiness, that's just the human flaws and the difference in timing that we all have as humans, So it brings out an energy as well, in the music that I think wasn't quite there in that extent, on previous albums. But the production is very much thanks to Tuve Madsen, who recorded it, and also the guy who mastered it, Thomas Edberger at Stockholm Mastering, because actually this time around we did a lot in mastering. So Tuve Madsen, who mixed it, deliberately kind of left things a little muddy to kind of bring stuff up in the mastering instead. So we used mastering to a much more extreme level this time, where you kind of bring out all the aggression in the guitars and so on at mastering more than at mixing, So it was done a little different than we have done it in the past, but it's more thanks to other people than ourselves, that it sounds the way it does.
Definitely. And again, you have, kicked ass on the album with your drums. There's absolutely no question where one can figure out how Tomas Haake managed to write these amazing parts. So on this album, is there a song where you felt you had to push yourself to the extreme limit just to nail it right?
Every album has its songs that are really, kind of tricky to play or harder on you, like either physically or just on a technical level, or sometimes it's just a matter of a certain style of playing and at a certain tempo. So it's not necessarily always the songs that sound like they would be hardest to play that are the hardest to play, because we record to a click track, and we always play to a click track live nowadays, and that's a real challenge in this kind of music, and it's something that I continue to try to get better at, because I'm definitely not perfect to get playing to a click by any means. So that's something you can continue to hopefully get better and better at. But the first song, obviously, Clockworks, has a lot of, that one's kind of tricky, and you go between 16th notes and 16th note triplets, where you do 2 on the kicks and 1 on the snare, and you have to go in between those all the time. That's very difficult. That's quite difficult to get that to flow evenly. So that one is tricky for that reason. But then you have Ivory Tower, for example, that sounds, it's by far the least technical song on the album, but it's actually one of the hardest, or actually the hardest to play. And that's because of the triplet feel, like a 6/8 kind of triplet feel, that is very slow. So you want to play like quarter notes on the hi-hat, and then do single stroke on the kicks. It's just single kicks. So it's just one of those tempos that's really kind of awkward. I think for any drummer to play. And we had a listening party last night, and a bunch of my drummer friends here in LA came out, and they all agreed like that song. They're trying to just kind of play that like on their legs, you know, just that style and that tempo, and it's really, it fucks with you. It's just weird, you know. So sometimes it's not necessarily, you know, the stuff that sounds like it would be the hardest that is. Sometimes it's like the stuff that sounds easy could be really difficult for other reasons, you know.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the technical aspect, it's the tempos and the feel of the songs, etc.
You know, inspired like sea of bands. You know it. Late from, you know, the late 90s to 2000s, 2010s, hundreds and thousands of bands are present in the world right now trying to do what Meshuggah did back in the day. And many of the bands are right now become, you know, they tour worldwide. So for you, as a person who has seen this happening from last 2 decades, where do you see this kind of music going in, this so-called gent, progressive mathcore, etc., etc.? Where do you see it is heading to?
I mean, that's really kind of hard to kind of predict, but I mean, I'll say one thing. I mean, first of all, we don't see ourselves as a gent band, but we understand that a lot of those bands have kind of grew up with you know, being kind of influenced by what we've done, and the whole style, and most of those bands like claiming us to be kind of the forefathers of that style is really just kind of humbling and really really just a cool thing for us. You know, we don't see them as copying us. You know, every band copied something at some point. You know? That's kind of how music progresses. You take one ingredient from this direction, and then maybe you add another little ingredient, and over time you get more and more genres and more. It just kind of continuously spreads out. So the technical metal, if you will, like I think there's so much cool things that are going to happen there. For if not for just, you know, like the musicianship alone. I'm sure there will be some great songwriters too. That's something that I sometimes feel is lacking in a lot of technical music, is that some bands tend to only be technical, and there's a lot of times for me there's no songs in there. It's not songwriting really. It's just kind of stacks of weird stuff that is, you know, very technical. So only a few bands, I think, that kind of, you know, still writing songs that are kind of groovy songs that you can listen to, where at the same time being a technical band, you know.
Yes.
But it's pretty amazing. I mean, just looking at like kind of the musicianship, if you compare to when we grew up, like what was around in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, like the musicianship now, guys that are like 20 years, and they're just fucking amazing.
Amazing,
you know?
right?
So there's so many young musicians now that, in all honesty, they do fucking eights around us as far as musicianship. But then again, you also have the aspect of songwriting, and that's something that we still try to do. We grew up with the, you know, British wave, and then the Bay Area thrash and all that, and they were still songwriters, you know, even though bands like Metallica was, you know, considered a technical band back in the mid 80s, you know, and they were for that time, but they still wrote really great songs that kind of still, you know, caught your attention and was kind of catchy, even though they were kind of technical, you know.
Definitely.
And so that's kind of where we come from, you know. So even though there's a technical aspect of what we're doing with our music, we're still trying to write songs that kind of make sense and that have kind of a certain flow to them, you know.
Definitely, Thomas. It's good to hear. So before I conclude, I mean, the elitism in metal is always been there. I mean, I can give an example of your Swedish brothers, Opeth, who left the death metal side of them and now getting into more prog rock with clean vocals. And you know that, you know, they came into the receiving end of terrible elitism from fans and critics about changing their style. So, you know, how does this impact the band? I mean, from your experience, why does this happen?
I don't know, man. I think if you take the Opeth as an example, they're good friends of ours, great live band. I think when you've been doing something for a long time, it's very easy to kind of fall out of love with something because you just grow tired of something and you want to change things. And that's another thing that I feel is fortunate with us, because we still feel that there's so much that we can do within this framework that we are, because we're not completely free. We can't do just anything. We're not gonna change and start doing clean vocals. It wouldn't work for us.
True.
So we want to always kind of continue on the path that we set out on, but then again, it's impossible to say how we're going to feel about that kind of music in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But right now, being like 27 years into our career, we still feel that we're on to something that we really love, and we still feel that there's so much cool shit that can be done within this framework that is us,
Absolutely. Very well said, Thomas. Before we conclude, how about Tomas Haake, in his own style, defines the sound of this extravagant, insane album, The Violent Sleep of Reason, in just one sentence?
Gnarly.
Gnarly. Always, a great time having a chat.
Sounds good, Litik.